Some of the deadly 2007 wildfires were caused by SDG&E power lines. Utility has some new allies in its quest to get customers to pay the remaining bill. San Diego has been trying to create rules for vacation rentals for a couple of years now, but the situation is messier than ever. And San Diego's new camp for the homeless has some surprising new tenants, children. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter Ry Rabard, the Voice of San Diego. Hi, Ry.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back again. Rob Nikolewski, energy reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Rob.
Good to be back.
Glad you're here today. Lori Weisberger covers tourism and marketing for the Union Tribune. Hi, Lori.
Hi there.
Good to have you today. And KPBS reporter Susan Murphy. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mark. Good to be here.
We're glad you're here. Well, it got very hot and dry again in San Diego County this week, a common occurrence in October. We were spared high winds that drive wildfires and so far escaped the destruction seen here a decade ago and earlier this month in the Napa area. But cause and costs of wildfires remain in the news here. So, Ry, start with the mitigation work being done by San Diego Gas and Electric in the backcountry, and it's actually drawing some complaints, right?
Yeah, there's a whole suite of things that SDG&E has done since the fires. They've built their own weather station. They're doing a lot of monitoring. But the thing we wrote about this week is they're converting thousands of wood poles to steel poles.
Sounds like a good idea. Sounds
right.
like common sense.
Theory being wood burns, steel doesn't. But some environmentalists out there point out this is a $400 million project, and burning wood poles were not the cause of the 2007 wildfire. So we're spending an awful lot of money to fix a problem that wasn't the problem.
Okay, so that's their complaint. How many poles are involved here, and what money are we talking about?
Well, yeah, we're talking over $400 million to replace 2,000 kind of transmission line size steel or wood poles with steel poles. They've already replaced 12,000 poles elsewhere in the county, and pretty soon all the backcountry you're going to have steel instead of wood poles.
Okay, and the utility did get permission from the California Public Utilities Commission to do this, but it could all hang up, right?
Yeah, so they got permission last summer, and then the CPUC reopened the case, but the CPUC hasn't done anything yet. And so construction is just sort of ongoing while the case remains open, and there's no sort of stay or injunction in place.
Lori?
Does SDG&E have an answer for why, I mean, it sounds intuitive that steel's better than wood, but do they have an answer for, hey, but that wasn't the problem, it was the lines themselves, why spend the money?
Yeah, I mean, they point out that there could be high winds, and steel would, they argue, stay up. Be more likely to stay up. Lightning strikes on a wood pole, termites and woodpeckers don't undermine steel the way they would do wood. So yeah, there are several different arguments that they've made to justify this cost.
Now, you mentioned some other things that they've done since in the decade since the 2007 fires to lower fire risk. What are some of those other things you wrote about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the more controversial ones is they have the authority to shut off power when you have high-risk fire conditions. But one of the more sort of friendly ones is they basically created their own meteorological station, their own weather, monitoring network. And if you talk to firefighters around here, fire chiefs, they really do appreciate it. It's a very top-notch way to warn people of impending high-risk fire conditions.
And what are the specifics on that? They've got a lot of monitoring stations.
Yeah, they have a lot of monitoring stations, scores of monitoring stations, cameras, and I think they have 3 meteorologists on their team now.
And so if a fire should start, and hopefully, of course, we knock it down early and it doesn't cause a bunch of destruction, but the firefighters will have that information in real time then, right?
Yeah, and not only when a fire starts, but they can know when there are fire conditions, so they can, for instance, if there's a fire going on in another part of the state, but we can anticipate that there's going to be Santa Ana winds or a lot of heat, they wouldn't send firefighters from here somewhere else on the betting that maybe something will start here.
Right.
Yeah.
So 10 years later, we're still talking about the cost of those 07 fires, Rob, and those claims, tell us about what the total cost was and the outstanding amount of money that SDG&E is still fighting to get from ratepayers.
Well, it came to about $2 billion.
Overall costs, yeah.
Right, and SDG&E had $1.1 billion in insurance. And they insist that was the maximum they got, that they could have had. So Now there's $379 million in arrears. That's what SDG&E is in right now. And they want to pass those $379 million on to ratepayers, and that's the real sticky wicket, and that's what really galls a lot of people.
And they've already got a couple of rulings against them where they've said, no, let the shareholders pick that up, not the ratepayers here, and yet they're going for another crack at that apple.
Yeah, they've this happened 10 years ago, and 5 years ago they went to the CPUC. The CPUC said no, but didn't end it there. They said they could come back and refile. They did, and so they're trying to get back. The real crux of the matter is that back in August, a pair of administrative law judges came back and told, and they took a look at SDG&E's request, and they recommended that the request be rejected, saying that SDG&E did not properly maintain the wires and the equipment in the backcountry, and that a lot of the responsibility for the wildfires falls on SDG&E. Now, a recommendation from an administrative law judge is just that. It's a recommendation. The CPUC, all 5 commissioners, they make the final call on this. And one of the other interesting things about this is they were supposed to vote on this about a month ago. And they have postponed the vote now 3 times. They postponed it again back on Tuesday.
Yeah, it was supposed to be again this week.
Right. And that's not terribly unusual. In the year and a half I've been covering energy issues and the Public Utility Commission, they often, especially if it's a controversial subject, they will often put it on what they call a hold. But there are activists who are concerned. They think that maybe these postponements indicate that perhaps the CPUC, the 5 commissioners, will vote in favor of
that the lobbying by the utility is working. Susan?
Could the postponement also be due to the fact that power lines are suspected in some of the Northern California fires as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I imagine in many ways the decision that the CPUC commissioners are supposed to make is almost like a trial. And I imagine that the wine country fires, even though they do have an impact in I think general people's minds, I think that the CPUC is supposed to make a determination strictly on what happened in 2007. And that's another story that I wrote just a few days ago, was how PG&E, the
Pacific Gas and Electric.
Right, and they're in the territory where the Napa fires are, and also Southern California Edison have jumped into the 2007 discussion by the CPUC. And
even though they weren't directly involved in the fires down in San Diego County.
So the story I wrote was, well, why are these guys getting involved? And the reason why they're getting involved is because they say that what happens in this case is going to have a direct impact on utilities across the state.
All right, Lori?
I think I read in one of your stories that it was either an analyst or a professor that weighed in and said that oftentimes the administrative law judge positions aren't really have that much weight, and that seemed odd to me. Why? It seems like it would have it was
Frank Wolzak, who I interviewed from Stanford. He didn't necessarily say it didn't have much weight, but he said that when I asked him, the specific question I asked him was, do you think that because the administrative law judges came back and said that the commission should reject this, that the commission actually will? And he said, not necessarily. They said that very often the public utilities commissioners feel like this is our decision, and there doesn't seem to be much correlation between what the administrative law judge may recommend and what they actually do.
Well, that translates nicely into a bite we have here from consumer attorney Mike Aguirre, who's been representing ratepayers in this whole thing, and what he thinks of that situation.
So imagine if you're sitting there and you're a party to a jury trial, and the jury comes back and the judge reads the verdict, and the other side says, oh no, don't read the verdict yet. Let us go back and talk to you, and let us go back and talk to the jury, and let us bring some more people in that will be able to make arguments for us. And that's what, it's a complete travesty.
All right, so Rob, this has got some people kind of frosted, does it not? The point the attorney was just making.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But again, this is something that that the commission makes the ultimate decision on. The ALJs the administrative law judges can make the recommendations. So we'll see what happens. Now they've postponed it until November 9th, we'll see if it gets a fourth postponement.
Okay. Rye, short time left in this segment, but I did want to get back to the whole idea of mitigation that the utility has done, and they're trying to do. Of course, the Northern California wildfires bring this right back into the spotlight again. What can we really do when we have millions of people living in this wildfire-prone area?
The Sacramento Bee had this amazing editorial a couple days ago where people are looking at PG&E's involvement, and the Sac Bee said, don't just look at PG&E. We're all to blame. We're living in a desert. We're living where there's brush. We're living along thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of power lines that have to be maintained perfectly for there not to be some fire.
And there's also been a lot more building within wilderness areas. It's kind of similar to what the Gulf Coast region recently experienced with the hurricanes. A lot of people are building on coastlines.
All the flooding, and you're just going to have problems. Last word here, Susan. We've got to move on.
I'm just wondering, if they're going to replace 2,000 poles with steel poles, will they still have to turn off electricity during high winds?
The plan seems to be that they still could. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, unfortunately, the wildfires are with us, and we'll be talking a lot more about this issue as we move forward. Well, short-term rentals in resort cities have exploded in popularity, and San Diego is no exception. With them come complaints from neighbors and concerns that they contribute to the shortage of housing. What's vexing San Diego city leaders is how to regulate the rentals popularized by online sites like Airbnb and Vrbo, which is vacation rentals by owner. Council members have haggled over this for more than 2 years. So, Lori, let's start. There's a couple of competing proposals. They're all supposed to get this big airing this week. Start with the proposals. What generally are the two groups on the council proposing here?
Yeah, so not only were there proposals that came from the city planning department via the mayor's office, there were those, and those have been legally vetted. There are also different council members who have issued memos having their own proposals, and those hadn't been legally vetted. One would be from Councilwoman Barbara Bree, who represents the La Jolla area and really wants to tamp down on these kinds of rentals. So her proposal, you could only rent out your primary residence, no investor property, and no more than 90 days a year. Then on the other end, there was another councilman who said it was pretty permissive. You can rent out, but there have to be rules about enforcement and posting the rules and having a contact on site and registering and paying a permit fee. And then in the middle, there was a compromise position by 4 council members that said, no, you can rent throughout the year, but and you can rent up to 3 properties, three properties, not just your primary residence. And if you're in the coastal area, it can only be, you have to have a 3-night minimum. So that was sort of the compromise proposal. And there was the thinking that finally there was going to be a proposal, if you got one more council member, you could get a majority vote, and finally consensus on this. And
again, we were supposed to have the big knockdown, drag out, this long hearing, and all the voices heard, and all the public speakers come in, and what happened? It got canceled.
Just a few days before that hearing, the city attorney, Mara Elliott, who had already weighed in saying that short-term rentals were legal because they're not in the municipal code, they're not defined, and therefore if you're not defined in the code, you are therefore illegal. She had already issued that opinion months ago. She came out and raised a number of legal questions about mainly that 4 council member proposal, also a little bit with Barbara Bree's proposal. And so some of the council members took that as a sign that we're not going to get anything done on Monday. Why allow hundreds of people to come down to City Hall and we won't be able to act on anything? And they canceled the meeting and said, we need more time to weigh in on this.
Yeah, and so
and yet again,
the vexing problem continues here. So give us an idea about the scope of this issue. How many homes are we talking about? How many people want to rent these out, and how has it grown in recent years?
So yeah, and everybody has different numbers. So I'm just going to go with the number that was in the city staff.
It's tough to really determine this.
It is the city staff report, and is it just Airbnb, and then there's kind of double booking, double posting on sites, so it's hard to know. The city says about 9,000 listings in the city of San Diego. Others say 14,000, so it's hard to know. And the real issue is with the majority of those rentals are what we call whole home rentals, because we know Airbnb started off with just renting out a spare bedroom, but it's really grown more into renting out a whole home, and that's the majority of them. One third-party site said that it's grown about 33% in the last 2-3 years, and because San Diego's always had vacation rentals, but it really has been much more popular, and it's grown into communities like North Park and South Park and other areas.
I'm curious, as with rents as high as they are here in San Diego, and they're increasing, and I don't know the exact number that rents have increased, 36% in the last 2 years or so.
Anybody trying to get in the market knows that.
How much more do people make in short-term rentals versus regular rents?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And part of it you have to understand that it's a lot of work to manage these, so it is more work than doing a long-term rental. I talked to one individual who's renting out about three homes, and he says he can make about twice in a month what he would make from a long-term rental. Others, it's not quite that high a margin, but you can make more.
Rob?
Is there a breakdown, generally speaking, among the people who are in favor of pretty restrictive restrictions, so to speak, on Airbnb things, and those who aren't? For example, they're super wealthy who don't need the money? Are they generally against it? And people who are maybe more middle class, although I guess you can't be too middle class if you got a place on the coast, generally in favor of it?
I don't know income-wise, but it's pretty much, it's really stemming from people who are noticed changes in their neighborhoods, are living next door to them. One of the guys leading it's called Save San Diego Neighborhoods, although he told me he recently resigned. But leading that effort, he's been living next door to this for about 10 years and simply can't take it anymore.
Is it the noise?
Yeah, he said it, and it's not even, it started out as it's these loud, parties. It's not really that. He says, think about when you're on vacation, and you like to, stay up late, make noise, and so they're in the pool next door or the hot tub, and you're trying to sleep, and it's midnight. And so it's not that they're evil people, but they're on vacation, and don't they, those vacationers, should they be in a commercial zone, not in a residential zone? What's
the response from the groups like Airbnb and Vrbo? What's their official response on San Diego trying to restrict this?
Well, they're obviously, not surprisingly, they're saying that it's treading on property rights if you try to restrict it too much, but they're very much in favor of more enforcement and some reasonable restrictions like this 4-member proposal, and the idea that, hey, if you have a permitting system, that money can go toward better enforcement and hiring people to enforce it 24/7.
What are the politics of the city council had put together this kind of delicate compromise, and then the city attorney steps in right before and just blows it up? I mean, what was she doing? How's the council been reacting?
So there's some difference of opinion, and I haven't talked to her directly, although I've tried. But I think there's some thinking that she was maybe deliberately trying to break it up. She said no, I think in an interview in the Voice of San Diego, she said no, that wasn't her intent. She was speculating maybe that the city council members didn't have all the votes in a row, but she thought that there was the ability to come to some resolution if you just make everything legal the way she's suggesting it. So I don't, it's hard to know if she was trying to shut this down, but I think she does raise legal questions, and as I mentioned at the outset, there was legal vetting of the city staff proposals, but there was no legal vetting of the city council proposals, and she's trying to, I think, bring it out into the open, and not maybe it's not so much in the back rooms being proposed by these council members.
When might we see some concrete action and some finalization? I mean, have other cities worked this out?
Well, it's interesting. I just read a story in the LA Times just like 2 days ago. You could have substituted San Diego in that story. It said, after 2 years of trying to wrestle with this program, they delayed action yet again. And so because you're really trying to tread this line between property rights and concerns of homeowners. And so they hope to get this to the council back by the end of the year, but then the holidays, so it probably is going to be in the next 2 or 3 months.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that one. Certainly a lot of follow-up in that story. Well, when we think of the sad plight of homeless people, images of struggling men and women trying to survive on city streets come to mind. Often overlooked are the significant number of children who also live on the streets or in parks. Susan, your story this week had focused on the surprising number of kids who've moved into a campground set up by the city. Start by describing that camp. Set the scene for us.
Okay, well, it's a camp that is set on basically a city-owned parking lot on the corner of Pershing and 26th Street. It's a great big city lot. It's the city's operations center. There's 150 tents here. There's a section for women and children and other single women. Then they're cordoned off. And then there's a section for men, there's a section for couples. People have pets. There's, probably a few dozen pets. There's also hand washing stations and toilets and mobile shower units. There's 24-hour security. They provide meals, at least 2 meals a day, snacks. And there is a large area for children for toys and games. They have a couple big screen TVs.
And the kids and families are kind of separated and segregated from men or other folks?
Yeah, so they're kind of in a fenced-in area, and the fences are padded so you can't see through them. Okay. The women and children, bigger families, have 6-person tents. They're all brand new tents. Some are 2-person tents. So, it looks like a colorful array of, green, orange, red, blue tents in this great big, huge, slab of asphalt. Right. Just outside of downtown. Now,
you interviewed this one bright-eyed girl of 10 who says life isn't a tent, but it's better than what it was. Tell us about her.
Okay, well, her name is Azaria Angio. She is just a light, very articulate, just wise beyond her years. She has the spirit of just optimism, and she has such a pretty rough background. She's one of 7 children in her family, and just before moving to the camp, she was actually sleeping in a downtown park, and I think we have
we got a bite from her
talking about that
from your interview. Let's hear that.
Wasn't very comfortable because we would lay in the grass, but then we would have to move off the grass and onto concrete because the what they're called, the sprinklers would come on. But the lights at the park never turned off, so it was like, turn off.
So life in a tent maybe not sound too appetizing to most of us, but for this child, it's an improvement.
Quite unimaginable that we have families, and she has an infant brother, sleeping in a park in the middle of downtown. And actually 3 of the families came from this fault line park to the campground. There are 40 children who live there. The Alpha Project, who manages the camp, they were expecting a handful of kids. We kept hearing about the seniors and people who are disabled who were going to be given priority. All of a sudden now they have, dozens of children. Half of them are school age, so they do go to school. Half are, babies, toddlers.
So tell us about a typical day. Yeah, if you're school age, the
kids
are going to school.
The kids go to school. They shuttle people, all day long, all morning and night. They shuttle the kids to school. The mothers go with them to drop the children off. Mothers often stay kind of in the downtown area. Some of the little ones go to preschool as well. They can run errands and, look for work or use the computer at the library. Other people who live there that don't have children are shuttled to either Neil Good Day Center, which also has homeless services, or St. Vincent de Paul Villages. Okay.
You also interviewed Christine Wade. Tell us about her situation. We've got a bite from her coming
Christine Wade is a 31-year-old's mother. She has 6 children, and she has one on the way. Half of the children are from her ex-husband, who became unfit to take care of the kids. She didn't want to give up custody because she loved, the children. She found herself in just this very difficult situation, and she was just relieved beyond words to be living now in this camp. And I think we also have a clip of her.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful moment because being out there's too hard, So when they came to get us, I was like, it was like a moment of finally, I'm grateful for everything that we get, because I didn't think that I was going to get help ever. I thought I was going to continue to just try to make it on my own.
Well, it's a better situation, as we say, for these folks, but 200 tents doesn't seem like a lot given the size of our homeless population.
No, and it's actually a drop in the bucket when you're not even speaking about tents, but speaking about people. We have, 5,600 people who are living without shelter, living on the streets, living under bridges, and now they've cleared, our encampments out of the downtown area, so now people have been pushed into canyons and wherever else they may be residing right now.
So this particular encampment is supposed to be temporary, right, until there's some more permanent ones. Is there any fear of some of the families with children that what happens? Will we still get to go to the permanent ones? Is our encampment protected?
So what I'm hearing is that there's currently about a 3-month wait to get into more transitional living, where actually you have stable walls and doors, like Cortez Hill or St. Vincent de Paul Village. But they are working. They have housing navigators who are on site at this campground, working as hard as they can to get people into more stable housing. But if the situation comes where this campground closes, the bridge shelters, which are the big industrial tents, open, then yes, families, mothers and children will move to those facilities.
And we do have a new housing czar who's tasked with doing something more permanent and try to really get at this situation here. I mean, is it something that we're just going to constantly have, or I know it's the big step back question, but it's so frustrating.
Well, I think right now, I mean, the focus has always been on permanent housing. That seems to be the solution. Right now we have an emergency situation with hepatitis A, and so we've seen in the past couple of months all these emergency measures going into place. We have this campground that is opened. You know, it really is only housing about 3% of the unsheltered population. They've opened up some of these parking lots or extended parking spots for people living in their vehicles. That also has, you know, services as well. So,
well, it's another story that we'll be certainly doing follow-ups on. It's great reporting. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories on the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Ryra Bard of Voice of San Diego, Rob Nicoleski of the San Diego Union Tribune, Lori Weisberg, also of the Union Tribune, and Susan Murphy of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.